Good evening, everyone. We are excited for our second talk with Danielle tonight. As you can see, we're talking about digestive wellness this evening. I'll let Danielle do a brief intro in case you missed the first talk, and then we'll let her dive in.
All right. Well, hello again to some of us who are here already. My name's Danielle. I'm a dietitian. Been a dietitian for a while. I have my own practice where I focus mostly on digestive health, actually. This is kind of like my area. And functional medicine, functional nutrition, just kind of take a more like holistic view at nutrition and look at it from like a whole body kind of lens. So yeah, today we're going to talk about digestive health, GI stuff, which is my favorite. And we'll just get going. If it will actually work. Hold on. I don't think this is going to work. I don't know why it's not working. Hold on. Let me stop this share and just like change
Yeah,
it.
that's fine.
Sorry. Because I'll just share it from something else. Um, let's do this. And I can just share like a portion like this. Okay. Can you see that okay?
Yep, I can.
Okay, good. Then I can still see my notes. Okay, so anyway, sorry about that. Um, some of the topics we'll talk about today is we'll just go over kind of like what digestion is. We'll talk about some nutrients for gut health. We'll go into talking about like gut disruptors or what I call gut disruptors, just some food additives that actually aren't good for our gut. We'll talk about some mealtime behaviors and how that impacts our gut health. Pre and probiotics are always a huge topic that people ask me about, so I figured we'd talk a little bit about that. And then obviously some GI upset during training, which I'm sure we've all dealt with, and why that happens and how we can manage that or potentially avoid it. All right, so just kind of like the basics of digestion, right? So digestion is the process of breaking down food into smaller units that can be absorbed by the gut and then utilized for energy, right? So this is like super simplified version of it, but essentially it's like the physical breakdown of food, right, into smaller units and micronutrients. Then the like assimilation of those nutrients, so that's the physical absorption of the nutrients, which occurs mostly in the small intestine. And then the utilization of those nutrients to make things like energy or hormones, muscles, etc. Organs involved, you can see a whole bunch of them. And then we also have digestive juices that are involved that include enzymes, stomach acid, different kinds of electrolytes, bile, as well as hormones that are all involved in just breaking down food. So why is the health of our gut important? So if nutrients can't be properly broken down, right, then we can't actually use them. So you can eat as healthy as you want, but if we're not breaking down those nutrients the way that we need to, then we're not going to be able to actually get things into the, smallest units they need to be to use them, right? Additionally, if like the surface area of our gut is altered in any way, right, we're not going to be able to actually absorb. Our absorptive capacity is decreased, right? And nutrition really is the foundation of health, right? So if we think about it, the foods that we eat in conjunction with like our genetics, right, our environment, things like that, really influence whether or not, we are able to avoid disease, we're healthy, we live a long life, things like that. So in our last talk, I had mentioned how most of our immune system, like 70% of it, resides in our gut, right? So that's another huge reason why gut health is important. A lot of people don't really think about gut health when they're thinking about, immune health or, they're getting sick a lot. They're not really thinking about their gut. They're just thinking about other things, right? Um, Additionally, right, something like serotonin, like 90% of that is made in our gut, right? So we have all these neurotransmitters that are made in our gut as well. So, folks struggling with depression or, things like that, can potentially be gut related as well. Um, and then lastly, digestion is a form of detoxification, right? It's a way that we actually eliminate toxins or end products or things that we don't need in our body anymore. So that if we don't have adequate digestion, we're like constipated all the time, we're not going to the bathroom, right? We're not actually detoxifying, we're putting ourselves in, a state of stress. So poor digestion can be a result of lots of things, right? Primarily either structural damage, or system dysfunction, right? So what I mean by that, structural damage is like physical, actual damage to the small intestine, which would mean that our absorptive capacity is decreased, right? So it could be, think of something like Crohn's disease where you have those actual ulcers, right, in the small intestine. That's going to cause damage to the actual surface area of the intestine, and now we're not absorbing as well, right? Um, Physical damage to the small intestine can also disrupt the gut barrier. So we see here, right, this picture down here, this is like a healthy gut, right? It's what it's supposed to look like. This here is kind of what we call leaky gut, right? What happens is sometimes different foods or even like bacteria, viruses, things like that can cause those like junctions that keep the cells together to open up, right? And then when they open up, things kind of get through and they go right into the bloodstream. And that's how we get like food sensitivities and allergies and all kinds of other unfortunate and not fun things. And then physical damage to the small intestine can also cause a reduction in enzyme production. So, for example, lactose intolerance, right? So, lactase is an enzyme that's produced in the small intestine. There's other reasons for lactose intolerance, like that enzyme just kind of like decreases production as we age. So, it doesn't mean that you always have gut issues if you don't tolerate milk. But for folks who do have GI issues and have this structural damage, they might have a hard time digesting something like lactase, right? Or something, other kind of carbohydrates as well. And then in terms of system dysfunction, what I mean by that is it's something other than that structural damage. So it could be, poor gastric motility, you could have low stomach acid, you're not producing enough enzymes, or just poor output of enzymes, sluggish bile flow, right? All of these things can happen for a variety of reasons. Like I can name a million of them. Some are structural damage, but regardless, right, not going to have great digestion. So some nutrients for gut health, there's a ton of them, but these are just some major ones. So zinc, for example, super important for the production of stomach acid. It's actually really important for the healing and like regeneration of what are called parietal cells, which are these cells in our stomach that actually pump out the stomach acid, right? So something like H. pylori bacteria actually damages those cells. So one of the major kind of treatments that should go along with that is supplementing with zinc to help actually regenerate those cells and kind of upregulate the production of stomach acid again. Fiber, we all know fiber is important. So this supports gut motility. It adds bulk to stool, which is important to prevent constipation, and it promotes microbial variety in the gut. So that's a huge one, and we'll talk more about that when we get to the probiotics. But we want a nice variety of bacteria in our gut. So women need around 25 grams of fiber per day. More isn't a bad thing, actually. And there's all different kinds of fiber, right? There's like soluble, insoluble, etc. And sometimes people will ask me a lot, like, I don't know what kind to eat, right? If you're eating whole foods, like the fiber doesn't come in isolation, right? In plant foods, you're getting both, right? You're always going to get those two types of fiber. Some are higher in others, but you don't have to stress too much about like which one am I getting if you're eating whole foods. Okay. Fermented foods, so these they like basically inoculate the gut, right, with different kinds of bacteria. So this is a good way of introducing new bacteria or just kind of like replenishing the bacteria that we have in our gut. Bitter foods, this is one people don't really always know about. So our entire GI tract is lined with receptors for like bitter taste or bitter foods, right? So what that means is that when those receptors bind, it actually stimulates the release of all different kinds of digestive juices. So stomach acid, right? It starts like bile flow, enzymes, things like that. So for people who are having really slow digestion, like maybe they tell me, they have heartburn a lot, or they just feel like things aren't moving, right? It's like sitting in your gut, you're like always full, you're bloated. Bitter foods can really help with that, with getting things kind of moving. Okay. Protein, always important. We all know about protein, critical for like the gut barrier actual function and repair, but also protein is like the building block of enzymes, right? Enzymes are protein, so we need to make sure we have enough of them. And then fat, also necessary for that gut barrier function. And it also helps with microbial diversity as well. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. So here are some examples of some of those foods, right? There's more, but this is just kind of like a quick cheat sheet list, right? So zinc, oftentimes in like nuts, seeds, things like that, primarily like cashews, pumpkin seeds, those kinds of things. Oysters, if you're eating oysters often. I don't know who's casually eating oysters, but you never know. Fiber, essentially any whole fruit, whole vegetable, whole grain is going to be high in fiber, or at least provide some fiber. Nuts, seeds, and beans as well. We're going to talk a little bit about like prebiotic fiber, and I'll talk to you guys a little bit about the difference between that and some of the others in a little while. So fermented foods, so like yogurt, kimchi, sauerkraut, tofu, tempeh, miso, things like that. And then the bitter foods, so there's a bigger list. There's a lot more than this, right? But arugula, like endive, dandelion greens, like broccoli rabe, right? Those really bitter veggies like kale, raw cacao, dill, stuff like that counts as like the bitter foods. Oftentimes you'll find like you can find this in like teas, like dandelion tea, right? I use those a lot with clients. They also have like tinctures, like bitter tinctures, right? And you've probably like even just like at a bar, like bitters and soda, things like that. Those bitters aren't necessarily as like therapeutic, but it's the same kind of idea, right? Is that you're having that like as a after dinner drink or something like that to help with digestion. The theory is still there. So protein, we all know what protein foods are. There are some examples. And then fats, this is primarily like the unsaturated healthy fats. So like your olives, olive oils, nuts, seeds, avocados. So grass-fed butter specifically is really high in a specific fat called butyrate. So this is a short chain fatty acid that's really important for gut barrier, like the actual integrity of the gut lining, as well as promoting diversity of the gut bacteria because it's like a source of food for the cells in the colon. And grass-fed butter specifically is really high in that, which is fun. Okay, so the gut disruptors I list on here, not to make everybody afraid or be like fear-mongering or any of that, but mostly just for information, right? This, I have to say, these aren't something that like you have to completely avoid all the time, right? Like if you have no gut issues, your family history is like pretty good, there's like no gut stuff in your family, right? You don't necessarily have to stress as much, right? But for those people who do have things like Crohn's disease or colitis, or they do have celiac disease or something like that, then I'm a little more strict when I'm like with my own clients of like, listen, we should be careful of these foods, right? So any sort of excessive intake of added sugar, saturated fat, lots of new research coming out on high fructose corn syrup and its impact on the gut, alcohol, NSAIDs and PPIs. So PPIs are proton pump inhibitors. They just simply decrease stomach acid output. That's like their role, right? But in doing that, they're impacting digestion in like a whole bunch of ways. So short-term use of PPIs is totally fine, but doctors will put you on a PPI forever and not even think about it. I mean, my doctor put me on one when I was like 14, and it was like there was like no plan to ever take me off, right? They think it's like safe. Artificial sweeteners, any kind. And then the emulsifiers, the thickeners, and the gums are the primary ones that really do kind of mess up the gut lining if you're already kind of predisposed. So what happens is that these food additives have all been shown in research to some capacity to either impact the microbiome in terms of like diversity of the gut, like killing off certain bacteria, or actually degrading the intestinal barrier, or just like decreasing its function or things like that. So like I said, like, if you don't have any kind of gut issues, probably not something you have to be super concerned about. But I mean, if you do, it's it's worth noting, right? So there's a little food label here. This is just like a protein shake, like a ready to drink protein shake. And you can see all of like the thickeners. There's like a bunch of them in there, right? Um, Artificial sweetener, different kinds of gums, carrageenan. It adds up. It's like, okay, if there's one of them, that's fine, right? We can get away with it maybe, like towards the bottom of the label. But like when there's all these, it's like, okay. So I find that you see these a lot in like the dairy-free stuff, like the almond milks, the oat milks, right? Dairy-free yogurts, ready to drink protein shakes, protein bars. Um, that kind of stuff is where I feel like you see a lot of this stuff. It's just worth noting. So talking about how to support your gut at meal times, right? So the first thing is spacing out meals like 3 to 4 hours apart. Okay, this doesn't mean that snacking is like never a thing, but the reason I say this is because there is something called the migrating motor complex or the MMC. So what the MMC is it's like all these little wave-like kind of motions that occur from essentially your esophagus through your intestine during the time of which you're like fasting. So you have to not be eating for it to happen. I think it's like probably not be eating for like an hour or something like that. MMC kicks on. It takes like 90 to 120 minutes or so to complete its full cycle. And if you can get like 2 cycles, that's even better. And think of this as like the little street sweepers of your gut, right? They go through and they like move all the like partially digested food or whatever that didn't kind of like make its whole way down to your, large intestine when you were eating, and it just kind of like cleans out all that debris versus letting it just sit there and like truly just rot, right? That's what happens when stuff just sits in our gut, is it just like ferments, and it's not a good thing. So this is why if you can do like meals 3 to 4 hours apart, right? You have more time for your MMC to work. Now, this is why sometimes if we like eat a huge meal and we're like super bloated and then we go to bed and we wake up in the morning, like I'm so skinny, right? It's because like all night long, this was happening, right? Just moving things along. So, um, obviously snacking's okay here and there, but to be like constantly grazing all day long, or having anything, even if you're drinking like coffee, right? Water won't turn it off. It has to be like non-caloric, but like coffee will probably mess with it. Sometimes tea, I think too. So, chewing thoroughly for obvious reasons, right? The more you chew, the more you like kind of start the process of digestion. We have enzymes in our saliva that start the breakdown of carbohydrates. So if we can just kind of like start breaking it down from there, we're going to have easier time digesting. I say limiting distractions at meals. I'm really the worst about this, so it's like totally pot calling the kettle black, but this is a huge one for so many reasons. One, because like we don't even realize how much we're eating when we're like watching TV or like working, right? Sitting at your desk, like doing stuff while you eat. Um, but also like you're just not paying attention. Like you're just like mindlessly eating. So it's never good for our gut health. And then parasympathetic activation. So this is our like rest and digest state. This is so important for digestion. So the vagus nerve is this big nerve that runs from our brain, right, all the way down into our gut, and it kind of branches like a tree, like it really touches everything. And it's so important in controlling like motility, communicating those like fullness and satiety cues right back to the brain. It regulates enzymes, and dysfunction of the vagus nerve is actually a huge component to gut issues that really just doesn't get addressed as much as it should. So starting off your meal in a place of like really high stress, like let's say you're like, oh, I got like 10 minutes to eat my meal and then I have a meeting to go to and I got to pick the kids up and all this stuff, like you're already putting yourself in this state where you're not going to digest well, right? So trying to eat meals in situations where you're like, okay, I'm at the table, right? Just like food's here, take a couple deep breaths, like eat slower, right? For optimal digestion. Obviously, we all have busy lives. This isn't going to be the reality 100% of the time, but it's like if you have that option, do it, right? At least for one meal a day, right? And then consuming bitter foods with meals or using bitter tinctures before each meals for better digestion is another way to support your digestion at meals. So you could do something as simple as just like a salad with like arugula and like a vinaigrette dressing, just before your meal. And you're like, all right, cool. There's some bitter foods just to kind of help optimize how well you digest. Okay. So prebiotics and probiotics, always a question I get is just kind of like, do I need to take them? What are they? All of this stuff, right? So probiotics are the supplemental form of that beneficial bacteria that lives in our gut. So the good bacteria in our gut, like the good guys, are called our commensal bacteria, right? Anything that's like not really ideal would be more like pathogenic, right? So probiotics are those supplements that provide commensal bacteria, that provide the good guys, right? Prebiotics are the food that those bacteria will eat and then grow and thrive off of, okay? And typically those prebiotics are coming in forms of fiber, and we'll talk about that. So to talk a little bit about uh, bacteria of the gut, right? So it's all of our gut biome is individualized, right? It's kind of like a fingerprint in a way. It's very different. Everybody's is very different. It's influenced on genetics, if you were a C-section baby or not, right? Whether or not you were breastfed, like all of these things really impact our gut, our diet, our environment, our lifestyle. And even though it's individualized, there are like general patterns that we've like research has kind of considered healthy versus not healthy, ones that lead to disease, ones that don't, right? So we know these patterns that we're looking for. And ultimately, diversity is kind of where we're at. That's the best, right? So thousands of strains of bacteria in the gut, they all have different jobs. We're still learning about all the jobs that they do and all the things they do. Like, as much as we know so much about it, we still know so little, which is really interesting. So the bacteria of your gut should primarily live in your large intestine, right? Which is also called your colon. Occasionally, they kind of migrate their way into the small intestine, and like in small quantities in the small intestine, it's like fine, you're not going to really notice it. But if those start to overgrow, that's when people start to notice like the bloating, the gas, the diarrhea, those kinds of things, which is SIBO, right? Small intestine bacteria overgrowth. We can test for that with breath tests and things like that. But yeah, we want to mostly keep all that in the large intestine. And there's like, and for one, right, doing the whole like keeping meals 3 to 4 hours apart is one way of actually preventing this, right? Because it's moving all of that food that would typically sit in the small intestine and kind of ferment and cause this bacteria to grow to move its way through, right? So that's one reason why I say that. I just put this little picture in the bottom right corner here. It is a snapshot of a test that I run on clients a lot called GI map, right? So this test actually gives us a snapshot of what your microbiome looks like to an extent, right? And we can see whether or not like what the levels look like of certain commensal bacteria. It tests for other things too, like parasites or other viruses that we don't want. But I think it's just kind of cool that we can actually like see these things, right? It's kind of fun. Okay, so prebiotic fiber. So prebiotic fiber, I think, is almost more important than taking probiotics, right? So this specific type of fiber is a little different from like the soluble, insoluble fiber. So it enters the colon mostly undigested. And basically the bacteria in the large intestine just kind of like eats it up, like ferments it, right? And then it makes those fatty acid chains that I had talked about with like the butter, right? That really helps support the lining of the gut, but also feeds all the other bacteria, and everyone's happy. So there's all different kinds of prebiotic fiber. So there's resistant starch, there's oligosaccharides, and then the others I listed here, like pectin and beta glucan and stuff like that. So some examples of these things, right? So the resistant starch, so boiled and chilled potatoes. So specifically, like eat these potatoes, like you cooked them, right? Then they got cold, and then you eat them cold. For whatever reason, them like chilling changes the structure of the starch in the potato. This happens with rice too. And they end up actually like being more of a prebiotic fiber. You don't get the same kind of effect when you eat them like hot, which is really interesting. Green bananas, beans, legumes, those are types of resistant starch. The oligosaccharides, you'll see like inulin, fructan, sometimes you'll see like fructooligosaccharides. These are things you might see on like food labels sometimes. Chicory root, right? Artichokes, onions, garlic. Some people have a really hard time tolerating some of these foods because they're like also like the FODMAP foods, right? Basically, we don't digest them. Okay. And then some others like oats and barley, apples, peaches, anything that's like got pectin in it, is another great prebiotic fiber. Okay. Something to be cautious about is that even though prebiotic fiber is great, right, it's best to get it from whole foods. So be mindful of like the yogurts and the protein bars and things like that that say they have like prebiotics in them, those like sodas, right, that are like healthy sodas, right? Because oftentimes what they do is they add inulin, they add chicory root, they add something like that. But in the presence of like those sodas are intense because they like add inulin with carbonation. And for some people, it's like, my God, like it's too much, right? And it causes bloating and cramping and all of these things where like if you were to eat foods with those, you might not feel as bad, right? Like we forget that food kind of has like other synergistic things in it that help us digest. So just be mindful of that. Like if you find that you're eating a certain thing, like a protein bar or something, and you're bloating or something like that, take a look at the label. There may be something like this in there that's just kind of messing with you a little bit. Okay. All right. So should I take a probiotic, right? This is, like I said, the question I get all the time. I think it's really important to consider like strain specific functions. And you're going to have to work with a provider to know that, right? It's not, there's too much to know in terms of like what each strain does. I would say like, working with a provider who has access to, there's like a couple of databases that have like really great information on this. Um, but just providing probiotics kind of blindly can actually do like more harm than good, right? So we want to consider diversity. So if we're just providing probiotics kind of blindly and we don't know what's going on in your gut, we could be providing too much of something, right? Which is kind of kicking out all the ones that are a little bit lower. Well, they don't have as much kind of room anymore, right? And we start to sort of lose diversity in that sense. There's also different bacteria that produce different things. So for example, there's some bacteria that some of their products of just eating and digestion is producing histamine, and some people are a little bit more sensitive to things like that, right? So we have to consider that. And if that's the case with a person, then it's like, okay, we don't provide those types of bacteria, right? Um, if you have something like SIBO, right, providing a whole bunch of probiotics can potentially make it feel worse if it's, again, the wrong types, right? We can also use probiotics to help treat SIBO, but again, this is where like that strain specificity comes in, okay? Broad spectrum probiotics, so that's one that has like a whole bunch of different strains in it, are really helpful after courses of antibiotics. You're probably not going to really, there's probably like a better chance of you doing something good for yourself than harm in that case, especially after antibiotics where you just pretty much wiped everything out. That's probably the one situation where I'm like, take whatever, right? Because like anything's better than nothing at this point. Um, Not really beneficial long term. Tend to kind of like cycle them. If I have clients using them, it's like maybe like 2 or 3 months on, take some time off, bring them back, right? But really, we're better off just increasing our prebiotic fiber and just letting things kind of grow naturally on their own. So eating fermented foods, increasing prebiotic fiber, and relying on supplements if we went through a course of antibiotics or something like that, where we need like just a bigger punch of probiotic. So GI upset during training, right? We've all probably dealt with this, oftentimes, like more often with like running, right? Because you're like jostling everything around. So you get the abdominal cramping, the bloating, the nausea, the diarrhea, like all of this is so unfun. There's so many different causes for this, and women tend to be more susceptible to any sort of GI distress with specifically running than men do for various reasons. But one could be too much fiber. And the timing of that fiber, when you ate it versus like, compared to when you started, went out to train or you had an event or something like that. Poor hydration. So that's both water and electrolytes, right? It could go either way with that. Both of those things are really important for digestion and the movement of fluid, like into the gut versus like actually into our cells. Reduced blood flow to the gut just happens when we're doing anything endurance related, right? All of that blood flow is going to your legs, or if you're swimming, like legs and arms or things like that. Or reduced blood flow to the gut, so motility is slowed down, right? So just naturally, when you start eating, things aren't moving. So that's why we don't really want to eat things really high in fat when we're out on a run or on the bike or something like that. And then high fructose intake is a big one. So we only have limited receptors for fructose. And once we can only absorb so much at one time. And once we kind of overload that, it just sits in the gut and it pulls water. And when it pulls water in, that's when we get like diarrhea and it's like a whole mess, literal mess. So, um, having fructose with something like glucose does help the uptake, right? But still, most people are really sensitive to fructose. So avoiding like gels and things like that that have a lot of fructose in them. I mean, there's so many different ones out there now. I think this has become more of a thing in the sport where like people really aren't using fructose. You can still find it in some things, especially with the companies that are trying to be a little bit more like natural, relying on fruits and things like that. For whatever reason, like the fructose that's coming from dried fruit and things like that, like if you're eating like a whatever, you're on your bike and you're using like dried fruit as a source of carbs or something like that, people tend to honestly have like less negative impacts from that versus like a gel or something. And I think it's just the concentration, right? You're taking like so much fructose in a gel, versus like if you're eating a little like apricot or something. So, if you could use real food when training, do it, right? Sometimes that's easier said than done. Definitely easier on the bike than it is running. Um, but when you can use real food, use it. Think about timing of, when you're going to eat versus when you're going to go out for your workout. Um, if you feel like this is an issue or you're having trouble with this, like this is something I can always help with and talk to anybody about. Because I think this is super common for sure. So some tips for a healthy gut, right? Just to kind of sum it all up. Always eating mostly whole foods. This is like something I just say all day, every day. Eating slowly, chewing as much as you can, eating meals in an undistracted environment as often as you can, making sure we're eating enough protein, limiting sugar, added sugar specifically, and any gut disrupting food additives if you're having gut issues, including bitter foods daily, consuming some fermented foods a few times a week, and then eating a variety of plant-based foods so that you can get all of that good prebiotic fiber. And I know you guys love recipes. So this is a cranberry chocolate chip tiger nut muffin. This is like a staple in my house. We make these muffins with like all different kinds of stuff all the time. And they are fantastic. They're super high in fiber. And I'll go over here. So what's a tiger nut, right? So it's not actually a nut. They're like small little root vegetables, but they are blanched and then kind of ground up into this flour that's like gluten-free, grain-free, whatever. It does have like a grittier, kind of like sandier texture. If you mix that with like a regular flour, if you're gluten-free, like any other gluten-free flour, it will like cut that a little bit. I don't really mind it. Like in the muffins, I don't mind it. We make pancakes with it. I don't mind it. But it is dense. Like it like fills you up. Like you'll eat like one pancake and it's like pretty intense. So it's never something that I'm like, let me eat the tiger nut muffin and go for a run. Just FYI, but they are good to have like on hand. They're great. They're really high in vitamin E and C, which are great antioxidants, high in B vitamins like B6 and folic acid. Like I said, super high in that prebiotic fiber. Also high in magnesium, calcium, potassium, phos, zinc, and iron, which are all great for our gut, all important for, anytime we're training, we kind of lose a lot of these things. And it's rich in healthy monounsaturated fats, and it's like naturally sweet, so you don't really need a whole bunch of sweetener when you cook with it, which is really fun. Yeah, and that's all I got. Thank you guys.
Where do you usually buy the tiger nut flour?
So the Pamela's one you can get online. I've seen like there's like an Anthony's company that you can get. We usually order it from nuts.com, which is a food website, I promise. It sounds like it isn't. But I usually get that one because it's just like a little cheaper
Mhm.
when I order it from them.
Cool.
Yeah. Any questions or anything?
I have a question. So as far as the fermented foods go, I've been trying to like work more of that in. I have celiac disease, so it seems to really help my gut when I do. And I do drink kefir regularly or kefir. But I'm wondering, like, do you have any other suggestions for how to incorporate those in a way that are sort of appetizing? I'm not a
Yeah.
big fan of just opening a jar of pickles or something and eating like, you know what I mean? Like how?
Yeah, you don't really like the fermented like veggies and stuff.
Not really, because I don't know, they're more, it tastes like pickles to me.
Yeah, you're not like a pickle, like you don't like that pickly.
No, no, and actually the acidity actually gives me canker sores in my cheeks. Like if anytime I eat anything pickled, I can't even have balsamic vinegar. I get like
Mm.
canker sores from it. So it's just I don't know if you have any thoughts, but
Um, the kefir I think is good in like smoothies, like using it as a base to smoothies or like baking with
yeah.
it, things like
Yep.
that.
Yep.
Um, yeah, I don't know what else. I mean, yogurt. Do you like yogurt?
Yeah, I eat yogurt every day, but either
Yeah.
yogurt or kefir. But I don't know about like if there's like tempeh, if that's a good thing to cook with
Yeah, I mean, like
in
for sure, right?
recipes.
That would definitely give you different bacteria, right? Because if you're using mostly dairy-based ones, you're probably getting mostly like lactobacillus bacteria. You're not really kind of opening it up to other ones.
Yeah.
So yeah, something like miso for one, you can cook with miso. You could get yeah, tempeh, tofu, things like that.
Yeah.
Um, I was gonna say like kimchi, but if you don't really love like, the fermented
Pickled.
veggies,
Yeah.
but
Okay.
um sometimes you can also find there's like some companies that make like I think like Real Pickles makes like a fermented like ginger carrot that I've seen at the grocery store.
Hmm.
Um, and those aren't like as pickly, you know what I mean?
Yeah. I know
Those
Willimantic Food Co-op, if you ever go there,
yeah,
they have this whole section of fermented foods when you first walk in on the right, and I've always wanted to try some, but I'm always
hesitant.
nervous.
Yeah. Well, with your canker sores, I get it. Otherwise, I usually am like, just don't be afraid, do it, right? But I get
Yeah.
why you'd be
Yeah.
nervous. Yeah.
This is really great. Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
you're welcome.
Any other questions? If
So
oh, Doc,
I
go.
have a question for um a problem that I have is when I eat before a ride, then I'll frequently get um some heartburn, some indigestion and it really makes riding difficult, especially when you're bent over, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, things that a lot of people can eat before riding don't seem to agree with me. For example, oatmeal doesn't sit well. Um, one thing that seems like it works well is peanut butter and jelly. But
Interesting.
yeah, but I was wondering if you had any other ideas of something that you could eat before a ride that w wouldn't be irritating.
Yeah. Do you think it's like a timing thing? Like, how soon are you riding after you eat?
Well, let's say if it's in within an hour, so it's probably better earlier than that, I guess.
For you, it sounds like, right? Like you might want
Uh-huh.
to, give yourself like, at least 45 minutes or whatever to digest.
Right.
Try that first before it's like, oh, it's a specific food. I think maybe you just need a little bit more time to digest. You can also like while you're having, let's say it's breakfast and they're going to go for like a morning ride. Something like ginger tea or peppermint tea, if you like those things, can help with just like motility and getting things kind of moving so that it's not just kind of sitting in your gut. You might actually
Right.
benefit. You might be one of those people who benefits from like bitter foods or like a bitter tincture, a dandelion tea, something like that.
Uh-huh.
To again, like help with just digestion so that it's not just kind of like sitting around.
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah, of
Appreciate it.
course.
Where do you get the tinctures, the bitter tinctures?
Yeah, there's a couple of companies that I really like. One is Urban Moonshine is one company that I trust. The other one, and I am like a partner with this company, so I do get kind of like a kickback. I think I like to just note that is Juj, Juj, Juj Bitters. I have a discount code for that one if you do want to try that one. I like those bitters. It's a friend of mine who I went to school with. It's actually her company. And I love them so much more than the Urban Moonshine, only because I think the one they taste better. She has a bunch of flavors that are really great. And it's certified gluten-free. So she has celiac disease. So she made sure that she got this product certified to be like less than
Oh,
5 parts per billion of gluten. They test it all
excellent.
the time.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we'd
that was
definitely
a
be
big
interested.
priority.
Okay. Yeah, we'd definitely be interested in that.
Yeah, I love them. She has like a cacao flavor that's really good. You could just kind of like take it, there's like a dropper, and I'll just kind of like drop it on my tongue a few before dinner. Sometimes I put it into like a seltzer and just make a little like mocktail and have a good time. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? If anyone makes the muffins, I would love if you share. Danielle, I can't tell you how many people have messaged me that they're doing the dates and peanut butter. So
I
I
know
actually
Costco's
had
been on a dates. I was like, I think Costco's out because everyone's buying them.
literally. I had another one today tell me that they loved the dates thing. Like, didn't know a
Oh,
way to enjoy dates, and there it is. So,
there you go. I hope you guys like the muffins. The muffins are good. They're like dense, but it's still like a good little muffin. There's like not a lot of sugar in them, so they're nice when you want something that's not like insanely sweet.
mhm.
And if you don't like the texture of the tiger nut flour that much, like do like half tiger nut, half something else. Um, like I said, I like the texture, but I could see where people don't.
Yeah, yeah. No, I think that's great. I've never even heard of a tiger nut, so thank
Yeah.
you. And I never thought of putting like bitters and tinctures and things that weren't alcohol. So,
Yeah, for sure.
all right. Last call. Any more questions? All right, I'll get this up on YouTube for our folks that couldn't make it. And if anyone wants to rewatch it, I think a lot of this sometimes is like we take bits and pieces and then we need to circle back and
Yeah, that's fair. It's a lot.
revisit.
I'll send you the slides so that if people want like the recipe and things like that, it's easier to
Cool.
access. All right.
Perfect. All right, well, I appreciate your time. I hope everyone has a good night. Sue, if you could just give me a Facebook message or an email, and then that will put it on my to-do list to give you the slides. So,
Thank you
Thank you
very
so
much. Thank you,
much.
Hunter.
all right, you're welcome, guys. Have a good night.
Good.
Bye,
Have a good
guys.
night, you guys.
Bye.
Too. Bye.